Welcome to Spirit Grooves, a program devoted to awareness, to becoming more aware in this world that we're all living in. I'm Michael Erlewine, and today we're going to be looking at the moon, not only as it is up in the sky, but also how it may affect each of us down here on Earth, psychologically as well as emotionally. There's a lot more to the monthly lunar cycle than just catching a late-night glimpse or two of the full moon, sometimes through our bedroom window every once in a while. I became interested in the moon in the late 1950s and more so in the early 1960s. I had read all about the supposed effects of the moon on us. You know, dogs howling at the full moon, the tide surging to flood stage, the ambulance crews working overtime, and all kinds of reports by nurses at hospitals about what happens around the time of the full moon. Add to that tales of mental patients and other crazies around the times of the full moon and you get the picture. Back then I was even a little bit of a scientist. I had asked around and quickly found out that any talk of psychological effects of the moon on us was taboo. The self-appointed scientific types not only said that the moon effects were not true, but like their evangelical cousins, they made a point of coming after me and even ridiculing me for raising the question. And I was just a kid, and these folks were my elders. I kind of kept my head down for a while after that. However, when I began to meet some of the great Tibetan lamas and Rinpoches, all that changed. Every one of the Tibetans carried a little lunar calendar around with them, and they very carefully observed the phases of the moon in minute detail. There was none of this, do you believe or don't you believe in the effects of the moon? And where we here in the West may know about the new and the full moon, and perhaps we even recognize the first and last quarter moons, the Tibetans were all over the lunar month, 30 days of it. By that time, I had become an astrologer. More than that, I had learned to program not only the moon, but all of the planets down to the second of arc. And I eventually became the first person to program astrology on microcomputers and then make those programs available to my fellow astrologers. That was in 1977. According to an article done for Red Herring magazine, my company, Matrix Software, is the second oldest software company still on the internet, the oldest being a little company called Microsoft. Before I knew it, I was providing astrological calendars for the Tibetans that I knew. And I was right back learning about the moon. But learning from the Tibetans was a very different experience than playing mind hockey with the more scientific types as I had been. I find it fascinating that most Asians, and particularly Tibetans, at least until fairly recently, did not have weekends off as we do. There was no such thing in Tibet as working 5 days and then take Saturday and Sunday off, especially for the Buddhist monks. Instead, and this is the interesting part, they worked 7 days a week, like all of the time, except for some very special days that they set aside for what they call days of observation. Days of observation, well, that caught my attention right off. What are they? More interesting yet was what it was they were observing. And it was not the moon in the sky. It was not anything outside, but nothing less than their own mind stream. Now that was a new thought for me. That's right. The Tibetans set aside certain days each month to just take a break from their busy life and simply look at their mind, their own stream of consciousness. And the two main days each month on which they do this are the new and full moon. And I'm not talking about gazing at the moon or looking outside, but just the reverse. They look inside what we call here in the West, mostly as a joke, gazing at our navel, some kind of meditation. And that's not the whole of it either. The Tibetans break down the monthly cycle of the moon into 30 separate days. And each of those days is said to be ideal for particular activities. And no, they don't take all 30 days off, but they do take the new and full moon days off. And some folks, especially the monks, observe other days as well, like the 10th and the 25th days of the lunar month. Now contrast what the Tibetans do with our own habit of taking Saturday and Sundays off. But our weekend is not tied to any natural phenomena like the lunar cycle. What is our calendar linked to? One thing is for sure, it's not linked to any natural or organic movement either in the heavens or here on Earth. Our week is just a succession of 7-day sequences, one after the other. It's not organic. When I was growing up, I was told that these ancient cultures like the Tibetan were probably just backward, as their calendar is synced and linked with the natural movement of those ancient time markers, the hour, day, month, and year. Later I found out that in authentic Chinese astrology, they call the hour, day, month, and year the 4 pillars of destiny, and they're serious about it. That told me something. Having worked with Tibetan monks and lamas since at least 1974, I can assure you each and every monk that I have met uses the lunar calendar to set up their Dharma practice. They make a point of being aware each month of the lunar cycle. That also tells me something. And here's another thing I discovered about the Tibetans which surprised me, and that's the fact that they don't celebrate birthdays as we do. Most Tibetans have no idea what day of the year they were born, like when we celebrate our birthday. Instead, they know what phase of the moon, the lunar month and day of the month they were born. Few of us know that. In other words, just as we are solar, sun-based, and we celebrate the day in the year when the sun returns to where it was when we were born, our birthday, the Tibetans, on the other hand, are lunar. They follow the moon each month rather than the sun. They know what phase of the moon they were born under rather than the sun. Now what's that about? Like the Tibetans, here in the West we also see the night moon in the sky when it's full, because there it is, but we don't observe the moon in the sense that the Tibetan Buddhists do. We don't set aside the new and full moon days each month as days to observe our own mind and our stream of consciousness. Where in Tibet, India, Nepal, China, and other countries, they divide the monthly lunar cycle into 30 distinct lunar days. Here in the West, most of us may be aware of the new and full moon each month. We may be. And perhaps we have some inkling of the first and last quarters, but that's about it. This may not always have been true for us, but that's the way it is today. In other words, we don't sync our lives to the organic cycle of the moon. Rather, we are synced to the 7-day business cycle. The Tibetan Buddhists are very clear that these 2 days each month, the days of the new and full moon, are to be set aside as days of observation, days for observation. It's an important part of their astrology and life, and a part of their Dharma practice. So, in other words, the Tibetans believe that we can benefit from observing our mind stream at these particular times. Just as these 3 bodies, the earth, the sun, and the moon, come into alignment with one another at the new and full moon, at least according to the Tibetans, at those times our inner or subtle qualities, what they call the winds and the channels, also come into alignment in our mind and psyche. This may be important because according to the Tibetans, The new and full moon are times when we can clarify our mind and receive more stable insights than at other times when there's no such alignment. Years ago, back in the 1980s, when I seriously began studying the moon, I talked with many very high Tibetan lamas. Actually, most of them were Rinpoches, and it was tough going. Along the way, I even found myself learning Tibetan. Anyway, finally one particular lama, who must have known how interested I was in all of this, gave a special teaching right at our center. Actually, it was out by a lake. And in that teaching, I heard for the very first time that not only were new and full moons very auspicious times, but more important yet, if the new or full moon happens also to be an eclipse, this inner alignment of the subtle channels is very much greater yet, and therefore deserves even more consideration. In other words, eclipses are very special times. New and full moons at the moment of an eclipse are times when subtle inner alignment occurs and special information is circulated and available to us. This program is not so much about the astronomy of the new and the full moons as about their psychological and inner effects, in particular at the times of an eclipse. And let's be clear about the difference between astronomy and astrology. Astronomy is the science of what happens out there in the heavens, like calculating the exact times when new and full moons and eclipses take place. And there's no argument about the astronomical facts. That's astronomy. So what's astrology? Astrology is nothing more than cultural astronomy. What all these astronomical facts mean to those of us down here on Earth. Astronomy is a science. It dictates the facts. Astrology attempts to interpret them. It's as simple as that. And while there is a very little argument about the facts and the science of astronomy, there are many different interpretations as to what these facts might mean. That is what astrology is all about. I've studied astrology for some 50 years. And just so you understand, I don't believe in astrology. Astrology is not a belief system like some religions. I use astrology. I find it useful, a useful way, a way of looking at my life. It's just useful to me. Now let's talk about eclipses. As mentioned, eclipses are simply new or full moons with extraordinary alignment or focus. They've been considered for centuries, actually thousands of years, to be astrological events of the first magnitude. Notice that I said astrological, not just astronomical. Ancient civilizations certainly interpreted these events as portents and not just visible facts. The traditional slogan is that coming events cast their shadows. This is never more true than with eclipses. If the new and full moons are important each month, and almost all societies believe that, then eclipses are even more important. They represent the spiritual keys to the lunar cycle for any given month and year. A question I asked myself was, how come we have never heard about any of this? Good question. It seems that much of the heritage of the so-called mystery traditions has been forgotten, or even purposely pushed aside by science. But the Tibetans, the Chinese, the Indians, and others have not forgotten what we apparently have forgotten, if we ever knew it in the first place. There's very little literature about eclipses and what they mean to us spiritually. Here in the West, we don't have such a strong tradition in this, but in Tibet, India, China, In many other parts of the world, eclipses are considered very, very potent and personally meaningful. In Tibet, for example, they're considered as extraordinary opportunities for the observation of our own mind stream, looking at the mind itself, something here in this country we usually pay little or no attention to, or if so, only fleetingly. The Tibetan Buddhists, in particular, have focused on eclipses as rare opportunities when our more subtle, internal, our spiritual energies naturally come into alignment or attunement, when things that otherwise we would seldom notice line up and can be more easily experienced by us. That is, if we know when and how to look for them. Eclipses are, above all, times of vision or intense insight. We grow up with the idea that visions are little scenes or pageants that appear in the mind to us, like in the movies. Actually, the reality is quite different. Visions are times of intense living, experiences when information, perhaps somehow vital to us, is streamed and imprints itself deeply in our consciousness, a little like a brand marks cattle. Some traditions actually explain it as if a sacred scroll of some kind were placed deep within us, imprinted, and only over time will it gradually unroll and reveal itself, literally speak or reveal itself to us. We read the imprinted message out from deep within our own mind over time. I don't want to get all otherworldly or Twilight Zone-like about this, as the Tibetans are very matter-of-fact about eclipses and their value. As mentioned earlier, eclipses in the Tibetan view are rare times of inner alignment, times not to be ignored by us, but times when we would do well to pay attention and observe. In fact, Tibetans traditionally set these eclipse times aside as special days of observation, just as Christians have holy days that they observe. And by observation, they mean just that, to carefully observe our own mind stream, our daily stream of consciousness. The Tibetans make time to do this, as opposed to ignoring this opportunity with business as usual. And although every eclipse, every new or full moon for that matter, has a vision or insight available to us, most of us have minds that are just too noisy to receive that vision. We effectively manage to ignore these insights. Perhaps they are too subtle, or we're not yet aware enough to grasp them. This ignorance is what the Tibetans call self-secret, in that these opportunities hide themselves, not because they are some hidden secret, but because we lack the faculties to perceive the phenomenon. Our awareness is just not subtle enough. We just don't get it. Worse yet, we habitually tend to ignore these messengers. However, I've found that at the time of an eclipse, certain individuals either are naturally sensitive to this information or find themselves rubbed awake by life events around them, awake enough to consciously experience these eclipse visions. At any given time in history, some of us are awake, and we experience these visions consciously. And of course, trained meditators learn to be aware of these visions just as they are broadcast. They're tuned in. I will not dwell on how to train the mind to be more sensitive here, but it's sure worth understanding. What I do want to point out is that when we have an eclipse, while the exact moment of the eclipse marks the precise center of that eclipse time, the effect of an eclipse is not as simple as the moment when it reaches its maximum. The whole lunar cycle around an eclipse, in particular the week before and after an eclipse, is when the so-called eclipse vision arises and imprints us. So don't get too specific about a day and a time. The vision of an eclipse fills the whole time period around it. Instead, we're advised to be aware that at these times of intense experiences that rivet us, that involve us totally, they can sneak up on us. A vision is not an idea that you will simply grasp or that comes to you like a picture or a thought, but a total absorbing, vivid experience that is beyond our understanding. It envelops and absorbs our complete attention and will only reveal its entire meaning to us over time. This is where the concept of the sacred scroll and its gradual unrolling in our mind comes in. Eclipse visions are always totally absorbing. They require time to absorb. In other words, they have a future in them for us to work through. And that is where the idea that these visions are somehow prophetic comes into play. It's not that these eclipse imprints tell the future, but rather they hold the future and will only reveal themselves to us over time. It takes time for us to grasp these messages, and they last or hold our attention until the future. They last until then. It takes time to assimilate their meaning or message. Hopefully you get the idea. They come from the present and bring with them the future, which means that they last until then. I've written 2 free ebooks on the moon. They are for those of you who would like to read further into this fascinating topic. The books are available for download at this web address, so you might want to jot it down. It's easy. Just go to astrologyland.com and you will find a number of free ebooks. My name is Michael Erlewine, and I curate what is probably the largest library of astrology in the world, the Heart Center Library. I hope you have enjoyed this segment of Spirit Grooves, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. The new moon is when the moon is lost in and merged with the sun. At new moon, the moon is directly between those of us on Earth and the sun. In the history of astrology, at the moment of the new moon, when the Earth, sun, and moon line up, the sun is said to infuse the Earth and moon with new energy and insight. This solar alignment has been said to somehow emit a tone or impulse that resonates or rings through us like a bell. After this new moon alignment, during the next 30-day lunar cycle, the tradition states that the moon distributes that solar message to Earth, day by day. The insight or impulse taken in at the new moon grows to fruition and blossoms or reaches a peak at the full moon. That's the tradition in both the East and the West. Therefore, a new moon eclipse provides a moment when extraordinary insight and vision are available to us. It's possible, at least at these key times, for some of us to experience in our lives what has been called the vision of the eclipse, and to keep or remember that vision in mind and respond to it. That's right. There appears to be a central theme or principal insight connected with major eclipses. And let me make clear just what we mean here by the word vision. Having a vision does not mean the fairy tale dream picture we might conjure up or that we see in the movies when someone appears to have a vision. But it's related. A vision has more of a psychedelic character, a moment of being fully present, of vivid awareness and living life consciously, a moment of extreme clarity and understanding when, in a flash, we know or experience an insight in its entirety. We take it in and we absorb it deeply. There are times in each of our lives when we have vision and vividly see some intrinsic truth about our lives, about life itself. Eclipses are times of vivid awareness when these insights are more likely. Let's see how this vision thing works. Around the times of new and full moon eclipses, there appears to be a common impulse or universal vision that occurs when the sun, earth, and moon line up with one another. We all get it, or are exposed to it at least. And while most of us just tend to ignore it, each of us interprets the insight or vision in our personal way. The theme or essence of the vision of a particular eclipse is a common experience. The whole world has it, but it is possible for each of us to share in that vision consciously. And although the whole world experiences it at the same time, only some seem capable of remembering the experience consciously. It seems that without special training, we are only able to be consciously aware of the current vision of an eclipse at special or crucial moments in our lifetimes, times when we are just naturally aware. The particular message or vision of any given eclipse will tend to infuse itself, to dominate our deeper subconscious minds for weeks surrounding that eclipse. And it's a peculiarity of these eclipse moments that these visions, they can happen. We get them days or even weeks before or after the actual moment of an eclipse. In other words, the eclipse vision theme pervades the time prior to and after the actual physical event, the moment of the eclipse. And when and if we are conscious or aware of the vision, it depends on us, on our sensitivity, on our openness, when it clicks in for us. Sometimes eclipses happen in pairs, spaced 2 weeks apart at the new and the following full moon, or vice versa. These so-called double eclipse times are particularly powerful, and the whole time between these events has been described as a kind of waking dream, a living vision. Learning to recognize a moment of vision when it happens, and then taking advantage of these enhanced moments of vision surrounding an eclipse can be important. It's something we can learn. In general, eclipses of the sun, which happened at new moon, represent vision into our nature, the nature of our life, our deepest insights and ideas about life, while eclipses of the full moon and full moons represent a waking experience, a sensational event, sensing, actually living in our own dream. There's one minor technical piece of information you need to have about eclipses, and for this I need some diagrams, something I've tried to avoid in this program, so here goes. The moon goes around the Earth once each month. When it is exactly between the Earth and Sun, we have the moment of the new moon. When it is exactly opposite the Sun, on the far side of the Earth, we have the moment of the full moon. And here's the point. If the plane of the moon's orbit were identical to the plane of the Earth's orbit, we would always have eclipses twice a month at every new and full moon. But this does not happen, and the reason is the plane of the moon's orbit is at about a 5-degree angle to the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. What this means is that if the moon at new or full moon is not near the plane of the Earth's orbit, we don't have eclipses, which is most of the time. If it is, we do have eclipses. At non-eclipse new and full moons, the longitude and direction of the sun, moon, and earth line up, but they do not line up in latitude. However, at eclipses of the new and full moon, these three bodies line up not only in direction, but also in latitude. In other words, they are exactly in alignment. That's the astronomy. Now, the astrology of these facts is fascinating, so bear with me. The Tibetans teach that at new and full moon, our inner subtle energies, what they call the winds and the channels inside of us, line up. Our chakras come together within us. If that new or full moon is also an eclipse, then our internal chakras really come into perfect alignment. This is what great meditators look to in eclipses as special times for internal meditation, for looking at their mind stream. I've tried to graphically show you what happens internally around the time of eclipses. As this inner alignment starts to come together, hopefully this will give you a better picture of what takes place inside of us spiritually.